Hello friends, myself Shriram Korde. Now let's try to solve some more problems with respect to loops. So let's take an example. Let us say that it's a question related to the insurance agents. Let us say that there are 5 insurance agents, and normally insurance agents sell insurance policies. So let us assume that every week they sell 40 insurance policies. And whenever they sell 40 insurance policies, essentially that is part of that salary. However, if they sell additional policies, then they get extra amount, and that extra amount is rupees 500 per policy sold. So now the question is, we are supposed to write a program which will determine additional amount paid. I hope the question is very clear. We are assuming 5 insurance agents are there, so that means this particular calculation needs to be done for multiple insurance agent. Right now we are considering it for 5. So let's proceed now. So to do that, we basically will have to have different variables which we will use as part of declarations and which we will use in the program. So let's say that we will say float amount. That means amount to be paid. Okay. So we can say that. Okay. So amount we can say, and we can probably initialize it to 0. Then comes the important point, is we will have to have a counter. So we will obviously have int I, and we can use say here we can have int I is equal to 1. We can initialize it. Why? Because now we need to keep track of agents. Why? Because the same calculation needs to be done for multiple agents. That is the thing. Then we need to basically enter the information with respect to the policies, additional policies. Okay. So let's do that. So additional policies, basically we will say. So I'll just put policies sold. Okay. So that is what basically we will have these variables. Okay. Now if you are finding it difficult to keep so many big words, we will just keep POL for policy. Okay. So that means now this is going to count number of agents. That is the I is used for that, and POL is basically policy sold. So now once we have basically done these basic things ready, now we can write a loop. So how can that loop be? So while I is less than equal to 5. Why? Because we have said there are 5 agents. So that means now I have initialized I to 1. If I would have initialized I to 0, then probably I would have just said I less than 5. So I think now that is relatively easy for one to understand how we are writing this. So that means now this loop will execute for as many number of times as there are agents. So this number is going to decide how many agents are there. So right now, as I have told you, there are 5 agents. Now we need to basically ask user to enter the, so we will say enter number of policies sold. Okay, so that is what basically we will take the data, and obviously we have to do a scanf on this. So now we got this information. Now what I will do is I am going to have a logic. That means if the policies sold are above 40, then only I am interested. Otherwise for 40 I am not interested. Why? Because anyway it's part of salary. So that means now I have to have a logic which will say if policy is greater than, okay, so greater than 40, only when basically, or we can say greater than 40, then what we will say amount, we need to calculate amount. So amount is equal to 40 minus because why? Because 40 is anyway the baseline. Okay, so that means the whatever the policies somebody will buy, so that we will subtract from the baseline, which is 40. Okay, and then we will multiply this using the value that has been given to us. So that is 500 rupees per policy. Why? Because number of policies sold minus 40, because anyway 40 up to 40 he basically gets as part of salary. Okay, so that's anyway, I hope it is clear. 40 is the threshold. And then accordingly we can simply have a printf here, and we can say additional. I just told you, like, we are interested in only in additional amount. Okay, so additional amount paid will be amount. Okay, so that is what basically is there. Okay, now we can always put number of policies for that, what is the extra and all that. So I think that can be decided depending on if you like additional information also, but that is what. Okay, else what will happen? Else, so else now there is no basically additional amount. Okay, so what we can simply say is there is no additional amount. So simply we will say amount paid is what? Here it is very easy to do. So we will simply say amount paid is not there. Okay, so there is no extra amount paid. So we don't have to give anything. So there is no additional amount paid. Okay, we will keep backslash n, otherwise this will create problem. It will mess up basically. Now, is there anything required to do that? We can always make amount is equal to 0. Why? Because in case you are interested in writing the amount here also, then we can just do using percentage d and amount. So that's why amount is made 0. Otherwise, as such, is not required. Okay. So now we basically have done this portion, and then one now needs to increment I. So that is one way. Or we could have simply done here for I is equal to 1 to I less than equal to 5, and then I plus plus, and I could have simply done it here. We don't require to initialize that. Okay, and then since I have now converted it to for loop, so you don't require a separate I plus plus here. We are simply using a for loop. So if I would have used while loop, then obviously I would have done here I plus plus. So now let's try to run this program. Okay, number of policies sold. Let me just make it say 43. Yeah, so that is correct. Why? Because additional 3 is there. 3 into 500 per policy sold. So it is 1500 Indian rupees. So like that you can basically play with it. Okay. Now I can once again run here. Okay. Now I can basically number of policies, basically we can number of policies sold. So here I will just say for the time being say 32. So there is no additional policy. Now enter number of policies sold. Why it is now happening in the loop? We need to do it for 5 times. Okay, so now let me just do it here. 50, say 50. Okay, so it is 5,000 extra rupees. Then it is say 23. Then there is no additional amount paid. Then it is say 78. Then it is 19,000 Indian rupees. And then let us say it is just marginal, say 42, and that's it. So that means now we have done this in the loop for 5 different entries. You can see this 1, 2, 3, 4, and basically this is what has happened. So we started with I is equal to 1, and then we had these 5 entries. So that's the way typically this particular loop program works. Now having done this program, Now we can basically do another problem, and that problem can be very interesting and very well known problem, and there we will try to basically find a factorial of a number uh, when the number is entered through the keyboard. Okay, so let me just copy this. So that I keep the things ready. Okay, so this is not required now. Okay, so now we will basically find factorial of a number. Factorial of entered number through keyboard. Obviously we are going to enter a number, and for that we would like factorial to be computed. Okay, so now how do you do that? So obviously we will have to do printf, and then we have to do scanf, so that is fine. But now we have to write a loop. Why? Now why do I say that? When I want to do factorial of a number, then suppose if it is a factorial of 6, so if I say fact of 6, then what it is? So essentially it is 6 into 5 into 4 into 3 into 2 into 1. Okay, now factorial of 1 is 1 and factorial of 0 is 1. So we know that factorial of 0 is 1 and factorial of 1 is 1. Okay, now here we are doing 6 into 5 into 4, that means n into n minus 1. That is what fact of n into n minus 1. We know this from our school college days. So if that is the case, then I can simply write this particular fact of 6 as 1 into 2 into 3 into 4 into 5 into 6. The same thing. Whether I do 6 into 5 into 4 into 3 into 2 into 1, or I do 1 into 2 into 3 into 5 into 6. Okay. So one and the same thing when I want to do the factorial, because it's easy for some people to understand. We can always do 6 into 5 into 4. That's not an issue. But if I just write a program which will just do multiply 1 2 3 4 5 5 till whatever the number that has been entered by user, my job is done, and that is what essentially the factorial is. So we will basically have the variables now. We will have the variables for the program. So let us say the number is a variable, then I we will use for loop basically, and we can either use a for loop or we can use a while loop. Okay, so let's say that I want to use while loop. Okay, and then I can have the answer. So here obviously when I want to compute factorial, the factorial is always going to be a positive number. That is one thing we know. So we can always make it here unsigned int. Okay, so there is a signed int, there is an unsigned int data type. Okay, so I can just make it here unsigned int. Okay, I could have made long also. Right now I am not doing it. Okay, unsigned int, and let's say this is the answer, which is actually the factorial. Okay, so I'll just say f for factorial, and I will initialize this f for factorial to 1. Okay, so this is fact answer. This is the factorial. Okay, now when I know I am purposefully doing it unsigned, why? Because now this gives me a better range. Why? Because I know that the factorial is not a negative. Okay, so right now, so we will ensure that we will use a better range with respect to the data type. Okay, so now I can simply write a loop. Before that I will say printf, then we will say enter a number. Obviously we can't enter a very large number. Okay, so that particular thing I am not putting that right now here, but ensure that it is not very large. Okay, when I say not very large, that means at least if I would have made it here long int, then it should be able to get the factorial. Why? Because when you keep on multiplying, the answer becomes very large. Okay, so the input number itself should not be too large. Okay, that is very important. Okay, so typically we will say like less than say 30 or something like that. Okay, so it's not very large. So let's say less than say 30 35 or something. Okay, so this I have not calculated exactly, but I am just trying to ensure that we take it handle it as part of the integer data range. Okay, then obviously we will say scanf. So scanf, and then we will do percentage d ampersand of number. Okay, so we now got the input. Once you get the input, now your job is to write a loop. So what is that loop you will write? So while and then this one. So while, how do you now do the while loop? So here we are going to use I as a counter. And now when I say I as a counter, that means suppose if someone enters a factorial of 6, then that means I will start with 1, because that's what I just told you. 1 into 2, that means I will have 1, 2, 3, 4 till num. That means num now acts as my limiting or the upper bound, I will say. That means, so now I will have I, and I will check whether I is less than equal to the number that user has entered. Okay, so if I is less than the number that user has entered, now I am basically ready to proceed forward. What is that? So I can simply say f is equal to f into I, because why? Because that is what I want, and then I can simply increment I. That's it. So that is my code basically. Okay, so that has computed the factorial. Why? Because we started with factorial is equal to 1 and we kept on multiplying. Okay, now let us take a case where we basically will have a situation where, so let me just put a factorial answer or value, and then we will say percentage d, and here we will have the answer which will be part of f. Okay, so here we got printed the answer. Okay, now the thing is, like, we will have to check for the various values. So first let's do that. So I will enter a number, say 5. So factorial of 5 is 120, that is correct. Why? Because 5 into 4, then into 3, into 2, into 1. So that is correct. We can run it once again. We will take a smaller value so that we know. Let us say that I will take 3. So 3 is 2. Why? 3 into 2 is 6, and then 6, 2 into 1 is 1. So 6, that is correct. So now this is working perfectly. Now let us say that if somebody enters 0, then what will happen? We have, that's why we have initialized I to 1. So because if I enter 0, then 1 is less than num, is not less than 0. That means it will never enter, and because of that f will continue to remain 1. So that case is taken care very easily. Then if someone enters say 1, number is equal to 1 and factorial of 1 is 1. So what will happen? I, that means 1 is less than, that I is initialized to 1. So 1 is less than 1. So yes, so 1 into 1, 1. Then I will become 2. So obviously it will come out and the answer will be remain 1. Okay, so let's see these two boundary cases, because many people get confused with these boundary cases. So let me just enter a number, say 1. So you will see the answer has come correctly, which is 1. Okay. Once again, let me just run this. Okay, and here we will enter 0. So it is not going to enter the loop. That's what I told you. So f will continue to remain 1, and because of that, the factorial answer is 1. So that is correct. That means factorial of 0 is 1, factorial of 1 is 1, and then obviously we are computing that. Now, in case if someone wants not to do it like this, and he wants to do it 6, 5, 4, 3, then what he can do is he can simply write this condition in a reverse way. So what he can say is num is greater than equal to I. Okay, then obviously here this will continue to be there, but here now he has to initialize this I to a number which is little tricky to do. Why? Because now the problem is, you, that means this I will be initialized, you have to have the I which will be initialized to a larger number, and then you are subtracting. Okay, so that is little tricky for a lot of people to understand. That's why people normally don't do it in reverse way. They will just use this because it essentially does the job which calculates the factorial. Okay, so let's once again run it. Let's do say 10. Yeah, so whatever that answer is, so you basically get that. So that's the way typically these programs work. So we have basically seen two problems in this particular video. So first was, we basically found out what is the additional amount which you can pay. That means like additional bonus or whatever additional amount you pay to an insurance agent. So that we have seen. And the second one is, how do you compute factorial? And we have seen various corner cases like 0, 1 and all that. Plus we have seen how we can write it using a loop where we increment it rather than actually doing it like reverse minus 654, but we did 1 into 2 and we achieved the same result. So I hope you like these two examples. Thank you.